Hey guys, welcome to a new video from NZ Pocket Guide. So a question that we get really often is, what are the biggest mistakes that first-timers make in New Zealand? So should you be coming to New Zealand for immigration purposes or for traveling around? Here are the 10 biggest mistakes that we see first-timers make in New Zealand.
Okay, welcome guys, I'm Laura and this is Robin and we're the team behind NZPocketGuide.com, which is New Zealand's largest travel guide and has thousands of tips to help you plan your trip or immigrating to New Zealand. And in this video we are talking about the biggest mistakes that first timers make when they come to New Zealand. Okay, let's kick off the list with that first timers often don't plan a trip long enough.
So when coming to New Zealand for your first time, maybe coming for immigration purposes, you still want to check out the place. If you're coming as a tourist, well, you're going to want to make the most out of your time in New Zealand. And flying to New Zealand takes a long time, it's expensive, and it's really polluting as well. So you want to make the most out of your trip to New Zealand. And a lot of people think of New Zealand as an afterthought after Australia or as a very small country. But what we actually figure out is that most people need 2 to 3 weeks at minimum to make the most of their trip to New Zealand. So don't think you'll be able to come to New Zealand for only a week and do both islands and see everything you want to see. 2 weeks is already a stretch. So make sure that you plan your trip long enough to make the most of the country. Plus, if you're coming for immigration purposes into New Zealand, you want to check out the country for an extended period of time to see if it's really a good place for you to, base yourself and actually, build a new life. So make sure you give yourself a few months before going down the very long and expensive immigration path.
All right, next tip for you guys is that don't rely too much on Google Maps. So Google Maps is quite good for getting around the larger cities and towns in New Zealand, but when you're doing more, traveling across the country, maybe heading to some more rural places, some places that are a little bit off the beaten track, then that is when Google Maps becomes a little bit unreliable. It has sent us into some really crazy places when we could have been taking nice tarmac roads, which makes it super easy to get to somewhere. Sometimes Google Maps tries to take what it thinks is the quickest route to get somewhere, but that's often not the safest. It sometimes can be some weird dirt road somewhere, which is, it usually just takes you somewhere really random. So for these longer trips where you might be going into rural places, for instance, we recommend just planning which route you're going to take before hitting the road, and then just making sure that Google Maps is going to take you on that same route if you do want to use Google Maps. Okay, let's head on to our next biggest mistake that first timers make when coming to New Zealand, and that is that they don't compare prices.
So everywhere in the country you will have to compare prices, especially in supermarkets, for example, where products are deliberately designed in confusing ways. You will have packs of not 1 kg but 980 grams. You will have little pots of not 500 grams, but you will have things of 360 grams and all these kind of things. And quite often the family value packs actually end up being more expensive than the normal size pack if you consider the price per 100 grams. So comparing prices is extremely important. It's going to be the same thing when you want to buy a new vehicle. If you are ever deciding to go buy a car in New Zealand, you definitely need to negotiate prices. Every price is up for negotiation, and any kind of prices you can always kind of bargain a little bit to get a bit of a discount. And you also want to compare prices because it always appears that there is not that much competition and that much on offer, but there's always a couple of people at least which are selling the same item, and you will be able to kind of compare prices in between both of them, should it be just between different physical store to online as well.
Okay, another mistake that first timers make in New Zealand is starting a conversation with a negative statement.
Okay, so on this one, I'm going to be very candid. It's something that happened to me quite a lot. So originally, I'm from France, right? And in France, we have very much of a debate minds, a debate spirit, and we enjoy those kind of debate-spirited conversation. And that doesn't draw any bad blood. It's just a very good way to kind of like, start a conversation. So very often we start with something that, we're not happy about, and we just complain about something, not necessarily about that person, but something that kind of bothers us, in the place that we're on or something like that, and it kind of spark a conversation. And it's something that I have done way too often here in New Zealand, and it's really not well seen by the locals. The locals are very much kind of very peaceful kind of people, so they will not debate with you. They will say yeah and just kind of agree with you, and you will just kind of look like a little bit of an arse if you just kind of arrive and complain about things. So just make sure that most of the conversation are always very basically very positive, and that you basically keep your complaints to yourself. It's something that I've learned pretty much the hard way, not sometimes just not fitting very well, just because, well, I was just trying to, I'm a little too spirited in my conversations. So yeah, it's just a real, actually personal kind of tips that I would like to give you guys.
Yeah, good tip. Okay, next we have most first timers forget to wear sunscreen in New Zealand. So New Zealand does have some of the highest UV levels in the world, and the sun is very intense. If you might be used to using factor 15 or factor 30 sunscreen in the northern hemisphere, and where you might usually be wearing where you come from, then yeah, that is basically not really going to cut it in New Zealand. The sun is much harsher here, and that's due to where New Zealand's position is, which is just below the hole in the ozone layer, and that's why there's not as much protection from the UV rays compared to elsewhere in the world. So basically, in short, just don't just be too
casual about your sunscreen. Yeah.
Casual about the sunscreen, yes. So yeah, and even in spring or autumn, and even if it's a cloudy day in summer as well, just make sure that you do have sunscreen available always with you, and you keep reapplying as well.
Yes.
So yeah, wear sunscreen. Okay, next on the list, first timers often forget to wave down the bus.
Actually, I remember that because some people ask us that question in the comments section of some of our videos on YouTube, tips about traveling by bus in New Zealand. So that reminds me, if you guys have any questions of your own, you can put it in the comment section of this video. We usually pick those as a subject for our next videos, or we answer them during our live session, which is happening every Sunday at 8 AM New Zealand time. We hang out with you guys for about an hour. Anyway, waving at the bus. If you're in a city in New Zealand and you're waiting for the bus, don't sit at the bus stop and expect the bus to stop because someone is there. If you don't wave at the bus, it doesn't stop. Sending real personal advice, I've been late for work multiple times when working in cities in New Zealand, just because I did not know I needed to wave at the bus, and so it just drives away, and therefore you have to wait for the next one. So if you are in a city and you're waiting for a bus, make sure to wave at it. That doesn't apply to like nationwide buses such as intercity or anything like that, but it definitely applies to city buses for commuting to and from work.
Okay, next on the list we have some people make the mistake of waiting for a waiter to come and take your order at a pub or a restaurant. So yeah, in a lot of countries around the world, you usually get table service like in any restaurant or cafe that you go to. But in New Zealand, for most cafes and most sort of more casual restaurants and pubs and bars, you have to go up to the counter and place your order at the counter, do your payment at the counter, which typically is before you start eating. On odd occasions, maybe they'll say like, oh, you can pay at the end, but it's typically you go up and order and you pay straight away. So yeah, if you're going to a cafe and you sit down and you think you're going to get served, and they're not trying to be rude, it's just not really a custom that happens here in New Zealand. But that being said, more sort of more high-end restaurants or more fancy restaurants will have table service, and they will come to you and and take your order. But then in the case, sometimes they don't actually come and place the bill on your table. Usually at the end, you still have to go to the counter and pay at the counter. So yeah, a few different rules in restaurants in New Zealand. Okay, next on our list we have that first timers often don't save enough money for their trip.
So New Zealand is not cheap. You guys probably know that if you started doing your research on traveling in New Zealand, or if you have watched any of our videos where we kind of talk about the different prices and pricings and all that. There is a ton of videos on the channel, or even if you browsed NZPocketGuide.com and you checked out, you know, kind of price comparisons or comparison for rental vehicles, for instance. New Zealand is not a cheap country, so you do need to have a significant amount of budget in order to travel in the country. Just to give you a rough idea, if you were planning to eat out every single day for dinner, your main will cost you between $30 to $40 every single time. So that would be the main meal, and 30 to 40 New Zealand dollars every time. So think about how much money you will need for the length of trip that you're planning, and make sure that you are saving enough. Even if you do have to delay your trip a little bit in order to allow for your savings to go a little higher, that may not be a bad thing, because that will in turn allow for yourself to have a much better experience in New Zealand. Yeah, New Zealand is fantastic, it's just not cheap.
Okay, speaking of money, another mistake that people often make when traveling to New Zealand for the first time is forgetting to double check their change. Now, I don't really know why this is. It might be the fact that in New Zealand, people prefer to pay with FPOS, which is also an extra bonus tip. FPOS is just another word for like debit or credit card. But yeah, in New Zealand, they tend to prefer card over paying with cash. So when it does come to the time when you are paying with cash, which we do recommend if you are actually just traveling as a tourist, it might be cheaper for you to just get to, you know, a bulk of cash for your week and then paying with cash wherever you're going. But yeah, when you are doing that, just double check your change, because we have found quite a few times that people just get the change wrong, and you don't want to be shortchanged, because no, that's never fun. So yeah, just double check your change when you get it, and yeah, usually it's not an offensive thing to say like, oh, you've got, you know, you owe me a little bit more, you know, you owe me however much, and then they're just usually like, oh, sorry, and they'll give you the rest. It's not a big deal. Okay, let's look at our final tip for first timers, and that is allowing yourself to plan a flexible enough itinerary.
So it's pretty famous that New Zealand experienced 4 seasons in one day. If you have watched any of our videos on this channel, you see us saying that over and over and over again. And it is not just a saying. Genuinely, New Zealand has its weather changing all the time. So having a flexible itinerary will allow you, for when you travel around New Zealand, to be able to work around the weather. So for example, one very popular activity in the South Island is a heli hike on French Joseph Glacier, and that activity especially, it's very often cancelled due to weather, because you can't land a helicopter on the glacier in the middle of a hailstorm. It just doesn't work that way. And so, or even if there is just a little too much wind. So very often those tours are moved maybe about 3 hours later or the next day, and you want to make sure that you do have enough time allowance on your itinerary to be able to move those kind of items around. So if it's your first time around New Zealand and you just want to get a feel for the country, you want to make sure that you do have you know, a flexible enough itinerary to work around the weather. Or if you are planning the holiday of a lifetime and there are some activities that are must do on your list, make sure that you allow yourself 2 days in that place if it may be a weather dependent activity, in order for you to have the most chances to be able to do that activity.
Alright guys, I hope you found that video useful, and if you did, an easy and free way to thank us is to click the like button. That lets YouTube know that we did something good. Or you can also subscribe to our channel so that you can get more information about traveling or moving to New Zealand. Also, NZPocketGuide.com is our website that we write, and it's a free guide with tons and tons of tips to help you plan a trip to New Zealand. So that's always a good place to go as well.
And if you do have some questions of your own, put them in the comment section of this video. We are here to help.
Alright guys, we'll see you for the next video.
Bye bye.